Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker at Elkins Consulting. Today's guest is somebody that I actually got to meet in person when I was in Washington, D.C. to do my TEDx talk on November 3rd. And we were introduced by Nettie Owens, my business coach and the Momentum Community founder. And when Nettie makes an introduction, my ears perk up. I get very happy because she's so thoughtful about who she introduces to whom. She's kind of a super connector. So when the first time that KD and I started talking, I knew we were going to have a great conversation. And I've been encouraging this person to please sign up to be a guest on my podcast, fill out the information, and let's get something scheduled. And listeners, you're in luck because they finally did it. KD, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for the invitation and the encouragement and reminders over and over again.
Well, I keep coming back to the fact that I have this podcast. I've considered stopping it many, many times. I have over 400 episodes, and there's so many times where I just get tired and on the last minute. I have to either record an episode by myself or invite somebody. And sometimes it just seems like more trouble than it's worth. And then I meet somebody like you and I think, well, I'll do at least one more episode because I want to have this conversation. So, yes, I'm honored and I know it's going to be fun.
I am as well. Thank you.
So, because you listened to a few episodes, that I love to begin these conversations by asking my guests to share something about themselves that most people don't know about them. It's not on their LinkedIn profile or their bio, and it's less common knowledge. And many of my guests consider themselves open books, but we always find something that is a little unexpected. And I have no doubt you'll have something to share with us. So what do you think?
So many people know that I'm a runner and I've run multiple marathons, but people don't know the story that I carried 5 smooth stones in my pocket when I ran my first marathon. And the reason I carried 5 smooth stones is that it was my gift to myself for making full professor. So I was training for a marathon. I was doing it all on my own. And in the summer, when I was preparing for a fall marathon, a fellow parent at my kids' elementary and middle school lost a 2.5-year battle to prostate cancer. Mm. And at his memorial service, there was someone who had one child who had a bar mitzvah and one who had a bat mitzvah, and I forget which child it was, but she had taken her child to Israel for part of the celebration. And she had asked Jerry what he wanted her to bring back. And he said, 5 smooth stones. And I was so inspired by the 5 smooth stones and the David and Goliath image that I decided I was going to carry 5 smooth stones in my pocket with me as I ran the marathon. But they're not just any 5 smooth stones. I figured out 5 words that were really important for my first marathon experience. So one stone fit the word love because that's a short word. The other stones have the first letters of the words ambition, focus, strength, and perseverance. So that's what I carried around. And then at one point, I made this wicker basket at a craft activity.
Holding up, and I'm going to take a screenshot so that we can include it.
Sure.
Okay.
And I began a stone collection. So a mentee of mine thought that I should have stones with the whole words on them. So she found the Etsy site and got me the whole words for all 5. And then I decided I wanted 7 words that began, for whatever reason, with the letter C. So I had 7 nouns. That was while I was still at the School of Public Health. Then I moved to the business school and I got 5 more stones and I had verbs because I thought it was much more of an active thing. And if I were to buy stones now, I think I would switch to adjectives.
Okay, why? Why adjectives?
Well, it's not that I'm not active, but I think as I think of myself now, what's most important to me, it's the description. It's the empathetic nature. It's the outgoing nature. It's the approachable nature that I try to show. It's the connective tissue that I try to be in various forms. And while I could translate those words into nouns or verbs, I think that the description and the description that's sort of in my heart and soul is really what motivates me these days as I think about how I move through the world.
I love that. You reminded me of a few things. One is that the whole idea of having a word of the year. Have you heard of that?
I have.
Yes. Years ago, I was introduced to that concept. Instead of having a resolution, you just have one word that you infuse into every part of your life. And one of my close friends, when she introduced me to this, had gone through a very traumatic year of loss. And so her word was healing.
Hmm.
And it was a verb because it was an active attempt and an active focus on spending that time and making that effort to heal. And I made the mistake of using the word focus. So when you said focus on one of your smooth stones, I kind of chuckled because I didn't have Strengths Finder at that point. And I was still beating myself up over the fact that I can't keep interest in anything for a very long period of time. And so I tried to use the word focus and beat myself up the whole year. Why can't I focus? Why can't I be somebody who just gets something done? Why am I think I'm smart, but here I am just failing, flailing through the year of trying to be somebody who can focus. And so after I guess it was about 6 months, and I just let it go. I just thought, okay, this isn't working for me. I remember the following year, I was the president of the Women's Leadership Network here in my little town. And we did the word of the year at our retreat in January, and I picked focus again. I thought, well, this year I'm a year smarter. I've done more. I can do this year. And after 3 weeks, I thought, what was I thinking? And that's when I took StrengthsFinder. And people who have focus in their top talents are people who, it doesn't mean that they don't have ADHD, because some people with ADHD, once they find something that matters to them,
Mhm.
they're laser focused. But I don't even really have that. So, but people who have that talent, that's where their best brain work comes in, is when they set aside time that every day, if it's in their top 5 talents, they have to feed it every day. And depending on who they are, it could be 20 minutes of focus time, it could be 2 hours of focus time.
Hmm.
But that's when their best brain power happens.
Hmm.
And I remember reading this and seeing that focus was like number 30 of 34 talents on my list. So when you said those words, I thought, well, make sure that they fit who you are and your natural approach to things, so that you're not beating yourself up when it doesn't work out.
Hmm.
And then when you switch to, well, you have the nouns and then verbs and then adjectives, you made me think of how I work with some of my clients and ask them to think of 3 words that they would want to use to describe themselves.
Hmm. So if I were to think of 3 words for myself, I think connector would have to be at the very top of the list. I mean, it's both part of my part of my core values. As I think about my core values, and I did an exercise recently to think, well, which of them would really be at the top of the list? And as I thought about, the combination of connection and authenticity and reflection and empathy, I'm like, the other 3 really all lead back to the fact that I like connecting people. And
Mm.
being empathetic gives me a leg up in how I connect people. Being reflective and seeing what worked and what didn't is about connecting people. And certainly being authentic helps me to connect people. I mean, today I was wearing a mushroom covered jacket, all kinds of interesting mushroom designs on it that I had picked up recently after seeing somebody have it at a maker's market. And it got me a free cup of mushroom soup at the Polish deli that I went to pick up some cheese for making pierogies tomorrow. And the number of people who just said, that's a really cool jacket. And that openness, that authenticity, this is who I am, just opens to connections in ways that I wouldn't have otherwise. So the authenticity is important, but the authenticity is all in the spirit of the connection. So connecting would be the first one. Um, I suppose as I think about it, the empathy really is the second part. And thinking about, the ways that I interact with people, the I think the empathy leads to approachability because people can see that, I'm not in it all for myself. I mean, I certainly don't mind getting some kudos for the work that I do with people as a mentor or whatnot. But it's not for that. It's for the betterment of the people that I'm working for. And if I get kudos along the way, great. But it's for others. It's outward looking. Um, and interestingly enough, while, the last time I took the Myers-Briggs officially, when it comes to that recharge, I was about as far on the I side as I could possibly be. When I tell people that, they're like, you don't act much like an I. I'm like, remember, it's about the recharge, but on a day-to-day basis, yes, to recharge, I want to go curl up with my book. I want to write a poem by myself. I want to do something that, gives me that space to have to myself. But more and more, particularly as I've, really identified that that connection and authenticity really go together for me, um, it is that outwardness, that extroversion that really comes through and motivates and gives me the opportunity to, you know, um, go to the TEDx event where, I met you in person for the first time and talk to other people and go to a big reception and not be as uncomfortable as I was as recently as 10 years ago.
Mm.
And so it's so it would be the outward, the connection, and the empathy. I think that would be three.
I love that. I love doing that with people with groups because it helps people really think through how they want to be experienced by the people around them. It's not just that, how do I want to describe myself? How do I want to experience myself? But how do I want others to experience me? And it shifts things for people because I always ask, are you doing those things?
Hmm.
Is that how people perceive you, or is this aspirational? And it really helps people to be more intentional about their behavior, making sure that they're in alignment with how they want to be experienced by the people around them. So I love your words. That is exactly how I experienced you when we met in person and actually at our first phone call for sure a few months ago. So when you think about this connectedness, that's a talent, by the way, in StrengthsFinder. I think you knew that.
Hmm.
And for our listeners, the connectedness talent is those people who are, when you think about your web of connections in your community, this is a person that would be central in that web, the person who introduced you to all your other friends in that group. The connectedness, a person with connectedness is uncanny in having these small world experiences where they go halfway across the world and run into somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. They always have those small world stories because they're constantly looking at the interconnectedness of our human communities. And my brother is incredibly talented in this. He's always making introductions, really valuable introductions to people.
Hmm.
So when I think of your connectedness, I also think of ideation,
Hmm.
that hamster on the wheel in your brain that just never stops, putting interesting things together. And the combination of those two contribute dramatically, significantly to the fact that you moved, as you said just a couple minutes ago, from the School of Public Health to the School of Business.
Hmm.
And most people would never have connected those two in the way that you have done that. So can you, without telling us uh, the details of how you move from one to another, tell us about a moment when you had moved into the School of Business and you understood, the bright light comes on, how all of what you were doing in public health led you to where you were in the School of Business.
That's an interesting question. I think, there's multiple parts of a faculty role. You have your research, you have your teaching, and then there's other things that we're asked to do as faculty, committees and leadership and things like that. And I think, the type of research that I do could span multiple parts of the university. And the teaching that I do could also span multiple parts. But I think, an insight that I had as to how things in the School of Public Health led to this opportunity in the business school where I took on a much bigger leadership role. The title was Vice Dean for Education. And so by the time I was done with this role, everything from admissions to career and everything in between that touched the students was on my part of the org chart. And when I was at the School of Public Health, yes, I did the research because I had to, but it was the fact that I was teaching, the fact that I was involved in online education, that I learned about new ways to teach and more effective ways to teach. And when I gave my lecture to celebrate making it to full professor, which the School of Public Health has a tradition of doing, I talked about the future of teaching. The two courses that I taught, cost effectiveness and health economics, and the dean said, "You're the only one I can remember who's talked about teaching rather than research." I said, "Oh, that's interesting." But then from there to take on a role of, the chair of academic programs and admissions in my department, to serve on the school's committee of academic programs to understand how the academic programs across the school fit together, to become the president of the faculty senate within the School of Public Health and get to see elements of how the school runs, so that I was positioning myself to understand, here's my teaching, here's bigger things about teaching. Here's my program, here's bigger programs. Here's my little piece of the school, here's the whole school. So that when I was called upon to have this opportunity to switch schools, to take on a very new leadership opportunity where I went from having no more than, 6 part-time TAs working for me to 5 direct reports in a team of 30 on day one and 7 or 8 direct reports in a team of 70 or 80 when I stepped down from the role. But all of that was to build up to understand, here's the opportunity to make a difference so that the student experience is going to be the best it possibly can be, and the contribution that I could make to that as a team member with the people I was working with. And so I think, thinking of it as those things leading up to this, blossoming of opportunity really is what made that difference for me.
And that totally makes sense. When I think about the connectedness talent, I describe it sometimes as you can get to the 10,000-foot view just like that. That you are, you can be in the weeds, but somebody with connectedness can almost instantly take in the big picture and see the patterns and see where different connections are made. So that makes sense. You learn from every situation and can expand and apply it to the next situation.
Your comment about learning from every situation, I know, some of my friends and mentees tell me that I have an uncanny ability sometimes to retell a story that happened decades ago, but tell it as if it was yesterday and bring them into that experience with me as I try to illuminate things for them. So that's very consistent with what I sometimes hear back from people.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me. I love it. So when you are working with a student, actually, let's go to a specific situation, a specific student. When you think about a student that you've mentored that has been able to shift gears the way that you have, where they started in one place and had enough of the experiences to be able to broaden and apply what they learned in one place to something completely different. Do you have a specific story you could share?
I do. So, I've participated in mentoring programs with my undergraduate institution for many years, alumni, current student mentoring programs. And there was a young woman, she's not quite as young these days because I started mentoring her in 2009. But I was introduced to her, and the first time I met her, she told me about how she was a double major in something called biobehavioral health, which is sort of social determinants and how they affect our ability to be healthy and alongside of things like policy and things like that. But she was also a music composition major. And I knew that at that moment she was thinking pre-med as well. And so I said to her, all right, is one of those a passion and one what you want to do for a career? Or if you're going to be pre-med, do you want to actually figure out a way to do music therapy someday? And years later, she told me, I knew you were going to be a good mentor from the start because you didn't dismiss this interesting combination of the two majors that I had. But over time, the med school fell away. She focused on policy for her master's degree immediately after undergrad. Of course, with an undergrad degree and a master's degree immediately, she had trouble finding that first job. She ended up working for an organization called Academy Health, which works in the space of health services research and bringing health services researchers together for a conference each year, advocating for more resources for health services research, and thinking about how to use it to influence policy. And over time, she's continued to think, well, what do I really want to do? And one day we were at a dinner. This was now about 2 years ago. So I had known her at that time for almost 15 years. And she's telling me about her work. And then she tells me about the side project she has. She'd been asked to do a podcast. In Washington, D.C., there was an art organization that helped people who were temporarily unhoused to realize that's not what defines them. And so she was talking to some of these people who were currently unhoused but working on these art projects. And the brightness on her face when she talked about the recording and the producing that she was doing and the music that she wrote and the whole process was incomparable to how she looked when she was telling me about her day-to-day job. And so I said, Rachel, if we're having dinner again 5 years from now, how is that going to be more of what you're doing and hopefully getting paid a lot more than the little side gig that you're getting paid for now? And what's interesting in the 2 years since then, for a while, she's like, can I keep moving up in this professional organization that I'm a part of? And maybe she will, or maybe she won't. But she tells me that she's looking at things where she can get back to what her roots were. She's interested in how people are healthy. She likes to use the arts and she likes to tell stories about social justice. And there are some programs out there that actually do focus on those three. They tend to be more professional programs than PhD programs, but that's okay because if that's what inspires her and she can actually pull her talents together for that, that would be amazing. And it took her, I'm going to try a little bit of this and I'm going to try a little bit of that and I'm going to figure out what I can actually do. But that little bit of social justice, health, and art that has really been part of her North Star from the beginning. She might have followed it for a while, gone off track a little bit, followed it for a while, gone off track a little bit, but realizing, no, this is what I need to get myself back to find that sense of this is my well-being, this is my calling in life. And as I think about the move from School of Public Health to business, spending that 8.5 years doing those administrative tasks more than the research and the teaching, but about 8 years in saying, I think I've had enough of this. And being willing to take on that agency to say, despite the fact that a lot of people are like, well, you're a vice dean. Do you want to be dean somewhere someday? And I thought about that for a while, interviewed for a position, put in a couple of, letters of interest, but it never really caught on. And I started asking myself, why is that? And I recognized that no, well, what got me into higher ed wasn't the title of having dean someday or even something even higher up in the university administration. What got me into higher ed was that I like helping people to understand things and I like doing the research to help solve something in the world. And so, she found her way back and she's still trying to figure out how that will manifest itself. And I found my way back. And so she can look at the steps that I took and how I struggled. And she knew me over most of that time period and just to figure that out. So I think that's a great example of how somebody can see my experience, realize that while I was objectively successful, even when I was in something that wasn't my true calling, that I needed to continue to search and think and ponder and always ask myself, is this really what I want to be doing in my vocation or not?
For now.
Exactly.
Or what's next? Right. I
exactly.
think we sometimes get into this idea that whatever we pick has to be it. And I remember when my cousin, who's much younger than I am, she was graduating from Elon in, I think that's North Carolina.
Yep.
And she had a couple of options. She was offered some work in in a yoga studio or something like that, and something bigger than just a yoga studio. And then she was really considering the Peace Corps. And she was really struggling to make a decision. She was kind of freaking out. And we got on a call. She used to come every summer and spend a few weeks with me here in Montana. And so she called me and I said, "What's going on?" And she's like, I just don't know what I want. I don't know what to do. I don't know what decision to make." And I said, "How about you make a decision based on what you want right now?
Hmm.
Not in the next 6 months, not in a year, not 3 years from now." Because, and this is something I said, and now I chuckle at it every time. I said, there are only two things that can't be undone: having a baby and skydiving. You can't undo those things, but everything else, you can make adjustments to your path
Hmm.
and find the next thing that will make you happy. And I think too many times we set a goal and we forget to take inventory periodically to make sure it's still the right goal.
Hmm. I remember before I had tenure, there was one obvious goal. I want to get promoted and get tenure. And I look back and think to myself, maybe that wasn't the most obvious goal. I mean, some people are like, no, I want to do research on this, and if I get tenure, great. Otherwise, I'll take my research and I'll go someplace else. But yeah, my focus was on the security, the wanting to say this was the thing.
Right.
But the problem was when I got tenure, I'm like, well, now what? You know, it's great that you have this title and not quite, 100% job security for the rest of your career, but it's as close as one can get to that in the modern world. And yet I thought to myself, well, so what? And I said to one of my colleagues, I said, look, I didn't think I needed much mentoring when I was a junior faculty. I actually do need some mentoring now. What are the options? What is the range of things that the university values? Yes, some people will continue to do the same type of research and teach exactly the same classes and go deeper and deeper in that respect for the rest of their careers. And we need people like that. But I'm lucky enough to be at a university that values people who are the connectors, who can think in interdisciplinary ways, who can, you know, be the person who is one day guest lecturing on the undergraduate campus and one day recording a guest lecture for an online course that I first recorded for 2 decades ago and revisited the School of Public Health. But most days I'm here at the business school and I could be in both Baltimore and Washington for the business school. And I get to know the other faculty and that sense of I'm here because, yes, I do the research and the teaching that is needed, but I'm also here because there is value in creating a sense of belonging to the community. And whether that's, the students who are, many of our students are international students. And, one student, when I pronounced her Mandarin name as Lu, she almost fell out of her chair. She said, "You're one of the first American professors not to just call me Yael." And I said, "Oh my gosh." Yes, I understand why many American professors who haven't had, hundreds of Mandarin students wouldn't know that. And yet,
Right.
that signal to students, I care enough to know that about you without you even having to tell me. And I read all the names for graduation, which I've done for a little over a decade. And well, many universities and even some parts of Johns Hopkins have switched to having AI read names at graduation. I've said, look, as long as I'm here, unless you tell me otherwise, I'm planning on reading names because it's the last connection students have with us. And I want them to feel like they belong just as much when we're wishing them well as they go on to whatever is next for them, as hopefully they felt like they belonged when they got accepted and came to our campus on day one.
Oh, that concept is so important. Names are important. Names matter.
Hmm.
They're part of our identity. I cannot even imagine having AI read names at a graduation. That is so lazy. That is the laziest thing I've ever heard. I mean, I understand whoever's going to read those names needs to do their homework
Hmm.
and understand how to pronounce it. And I know that students who have difficult names will actually phonetically write it out for the person. I know that's what they did at the University of Montana in Missoula when our son graduated from there. And I would prefer to have somebody mangle my name than to have AI read it properly. Really.
I think it's a much more personal thing. I think it shows effort. I think that effort is an important part of what the school should demonstrate, not just to the students themselves, but to the friends and family who are there.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's obviously you can tell there's something I feel very strongly
Well,
about.
me too. I mean, you spend so much money and so much of your life going through these programs, and then to have some automatic reader, I mean, that is just insulting as far as I'm concerned and totally lazy. So I'm glad you said that because I'm going to go on a rant on that in the future if I hear that again. That's crazy. So when
Uh,
you, sorry, what were you?
no, I was just going to say it does help that not only can the students spell it out for me, but increasingly students are actually doing what the university has asked them, which is record it for me to hear.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And that way, like even for people with Hispanic names. Some have a Hispanic name but have completely Americanized it. Some have a Hispanic name they still want pronounced much more like the original pronunciation. And
Mhm.
I try really hard to recognize, like for the individual student, oh, I remember this one, was still pronouncing it with the more traditional pronunciation. This one went totally American. And I try really hard because again, I just understand how important that is. And somebody, even got me the children's book called Say My Name. And it's seven 4-page sections where a student, it's a kid from Ghana, a kid from India, a kid from China. And something about the names and something about the naming traditions. I forget if there was a Caldecott Award winner or not, but beautiful pictures. Read it in 10 to 15 minutes, a very short story for children, but just to remind ourselves that, in the US, parents these days often are just like, oh, this name sounds good. But in much of the world, there are still some very strong, culturally heritage driven naming traditions. And respecting that and understanding that is an important part of so many people's identities from around the world.
I agree. And it all comes back to if you want the best out of people, treat them like they matter.
Hmm.
I had a conversation with a woman who was she, her strengths finder talents are all in the executing domain, which means that she's very task oriented and can be abrupt and abrasive. And that I see that more with people who lead heavily in that domain if they're not conscious of it.
Mm.
If they have been told it but they don't care. And in this case, I asked this woman, do you want to be a manager at some point? Do you want to lead a team? And she said, well, yeah, I'm a great leader. And I said, okay, what words would you want people to use to describe you as a leader? And I can't remember what she said, but hardworking, and I can't remember what the words were, but they had nothing to do with the people.
Mm.
And I said, how do you think people are describing you now? And she said, I know what they say about me. They say I'm abrupt. They say I'm a bully. And I said, okay. She said, well, I don't care what people think of me.
Mm.
And I said, I get that. There are times when I really don't care what somebody thinks of me. But when it comes to leadership, if you want people to bring their best, they can't be afraid of you.
Hmm.
If you want people to be innovative and give you new ideas and fix problems, they can't be afraid of you. And I
Yeah.
think about that with names too. Like if you want somebody to do really well, know their name.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear that. I mean, and for me, it's there's different parts of leadership. And I remember one time one of my direct reports told me, "You're the most empathetic supervisor I've ever had, but you can't make decisions worth a word that I don't want to say on a podcast."
Right, right, right. We don't have any rules here. You can say the word shit.
Not my style, but I appreciate that. But long story short, and she was right. And I think about that to this day. And I think about like the different types of leadership. And in the role that I was asked to play at that time, the people who I was working with are like, we don't want every meeting to be like a faculty meeting where we all get to say our piece and we're aiming for consensus. Every once in a while, we just want you to tell you we're going this direction. And I was never very good at that. And so to switch from that type of leadership where I was asked to like lead the school on X, Y, and Z path to getting accreditation or all these other things to instead, let's create an environment in the classroom where the students feel like they can ask me questions and they don't have to always know the right answer. And they can say something and I can guide them rather than saying, well, abruptly, no, that's not right. This is what you should say instead. And to get that feedback that they value being able to be not quite right and not feel like I'm going to then critique them for it or criticize them for it, but instead I'm just going to gently nudge them in the direction. It's a
Mhm.
very different type of leadership, but it is leadership nevertheless.
Of
And
course.
and that process of realizing, no, this is what I'm cut out to do. You know,
Mhm.
groups no bigger than a classroom, different groups over time rather than just biggering and biggering to, quote a Dr. Seuss story if you're familiar with that one.
Mhm.
But it really took a long time to recognize, no, this is what I'm meant to do. And when I'm doing this, I am fulfilled and I am happy. And this is what makes me want to come to work each day and do my best and then help others do their best.
Absolutely. It just goes to show how important it is to have diversity of thought, diversity of talent in your circle. I think about it as my personal board of directors
Mm.
because I mentioned I don't have the executing domain. I don't have the get shit done domain. Excuse my language. Um, but what I've done is surrounded myself with people who do to balance that out. Even when I am a supervisor, I make sure that the people around me have those talents because I don't, they're not in my toolkit. So I love that you acknowledge that and that you found a place where you can have that impact. And I think it's really important to remember that when we partner up in those situations, we bring the best to our teams. I'm reminded of when I worked for the university system here in Montana, and I worked with a guy named Bill McGregor, who was like you.
Mm.
He led with harmony and empathy. He wanted to make sure everybody had a seat at the table and had a voice that mattered. And while I totally agree with that, I also felt like it's really almost impossible to make decision by committee. You have to have somebody that's willing to say something. And there was a point where he would set the tone in the meeting, and he did a masterful job of getting the right people to the table and getting them engaged to participate.
Mm.
And then I would take it to the next place and say, okay, so here's what we're going to do. And here are the decisions we need to make today.
Hmm.
And what would always come of it, people would say, oh my gosh, that was the most productive meeting I've ever attended, especially in the university system.
Sure.
But the other thing that it accomplished is I would have these conversations with Bill and I would say, Bill, these people make hundreds of decisions a day. They don't want open-ended conversation here.
Hmm.
They want to know what the options are. They want it to be limited. They don't want a menu of 150 items. They want the specials. I have 3 specials today. Which one do you want?
Hmm.
That's what they want from us. They want to have a voice and they don't want it to require them to look at 150 more things and make a decision based on that. So I love that you understood that and found your place where you led using your natural talents instead of trying to do something with tools that you don't have in your toolkit.
I was going to say when I was vice dean, I eventually realized I love people who can just blue sky. And when I started to have much more influence over who was working with me rather than just the team that I was given on day one in this position when I held the vice dean position, I started thinking to myself, I need people with vision, but I need people with vision who are doers. Because if all I bring in is people who have vision, then we'll have great brainstorming meetings, but nothing
Nothing
would
will
ever
get
get done. And I
exactly.
recognized, I mean, even then, when I still wasn't the best at driving people to a decision and getting to the goal line, and I remember the dean at the time, he had come out of McKinsey and Company. And apparently, McKinsey and Company, every year, their supervisors gave them a gold card. And it was your strengths that your supervisor saw in you, your watch outs, which of course is just a euphemism for the things that you're not so good at, and then people who I was supposed to network with in my goals for the year. But, the 1 year, he's like, equanimity is a great thing for you, but you got to actually get to the finish line. And so, I some things I do get to the finish line. Yeah, I've run the 14 marathons. I've run two ultras. I wrote uh, a Sunday school nativity play. Of course, it was about a shepherd who was too busy to go visit the baby Jesus. So I think I was channeling something of my own lack of intentionality when I wrote that. Um, but it's interesting to see throughout my life and my career what are the things where I have been able to bring something into focus and get it done.
Hmm.
And what are those things that just sit? And every once in a while, as you mentioned earlier, in that taking inventory, of all the things that I was supposed to get done this year, why is this still on my list? And if it's still on my list, am I ever going to get it done if I have the option? And if I have the option and I'm not going to get it done, then can I either find somebody else who can get it done or just say, nope, this project's never going anywhere. We're going to just set it aside and move on.
Yes, taking inventory, setting your priorities, and then reviewing them regularly so that you stay on the right track. I love that.
And I think that last step that you just mentioned, reviewing them regularly, is something that a lot of us forget.
Hmm.
We'll have our word of the year or resolutions or whatever at the beginning of the year, and they slip. And I know one coach one time said, that she liked to think not just about the season changes themselves, so the equinoxes and the solstices, but she pointed at some ancient traditions where people recognized half seasons.
Hmm.
And that gets you to ponder what you're doing about every 6 or 7 weeks. And you don't obviously have to go through your full list every 6 or 7 weeks, but some type of, huh, that product didn't move forward at all in the last 6 or 7 weeks. Can I prioritize it? Is a lot better than just a once a year.
Absolutely. Yes. And coming back to what are the words? How do I want to experience myself? Am I somebody who completes this particular project? Is this for me? Is this should mine or is this should somebody else's?
And it's funny to think about, like, even when I was, people's supervisors and I had to do, the annual filling out of here's, the evaluation of an employee for the year. They kept telling us, don't just do an annual review and don't even do just a mid-year and an annual review. I mean, you might not talk about the set of the year's tasks at every single weekly meeting if you have a weekly meeting with someone, but you can't just let it go and do the mid-year and final review for the year. And I think, again, in the same way that I did that with people who I was supervising, I need to do it better with myself. And I've gotten a lot
Mhm.
better than I used to be, but there's still a lot of room for improvement on that one.
Right. Check-ins.
Yep.
I always recommend weekly or bi-weekly check-ins with every direct report. And it can be 15 minutes. Doesn't have to be a long thing. Has to be the same agenda so everybody knows what to expect every week. And I love that because I remember being an employee and having a boss say, "We need to talk later." This was like on a Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. "We need to talk later." I'm like, "Okay, when?" And she said, "Oh, I'll put something on your schedule." And now what am I doing? Nothing productive is what I'm doing because I'm in my head now, this whole internal dialogue about what she needs to talk about and what did I do wrong and am I going to get fired and what are the consequences and what do I do if I get fired and where am I going to go next? And, this ridiculous internal dialogue because she didn't say, we need to talk about A,
Mhm.
here's where I'm going with it so you can be prepared. Or we're going to talk in 15 minutes or, not having that and just knowing that we're going to meet for 15 minutes every week and she can bring it up then.
Hmm.
So, yeah. Oh, those check-ins are so important. But I hadn't thought about doing that for myself. And maybe that's a biweekly or a monthly thing that you put on your calendar where you check in with yourself, especially if you're self-employed
Hmm.
like me. You say, okay, here are the things that you had on your list. Why didn't you get them done? Are they just not a priority?
Mhm.
Do you need to just remove them from your list? If it's a priority, who's going to help you get there? Because you don't have any of the executing domain.
Right.
So who can you
A-
ask to keep you accountable?
And faculty aren't self-employed, but faculty have so much autonomy that
Mhm.
it is in many ways is similar to, that situation. When I was filling out something like, who's your direct supervisor? I'm like, I'm a tenured faculty member. I don't have a direct supervisor.
I
You
am.
know, exactly. And so, and then that's why I think, and it might be interesting to ponder, are there other jobs, attorneys,
Mhm.
physicians? I mean, some of these are positions where there's a lot less control over your own agenda and there's external things setting your agenda for you. But, are there jobs that have a very high level of autonomy where even though you are an employee, you need to do that same type of self-checking that an entrepreneur or a solopreneur would do for themselves?
I think it wouldn't hurt no matter what role you have to check in with yourself. And it could be your personal goals. Maybe it's an educational goal, maybe it's a
Mm.
training goal, whatever that is. I'm not motivated by goals. I'm motivated by action. So when I look at the things that I want to accomplish, I don't consider them goals necessarily. Just like,
Mm.
oh, kind of want this off my plate. Be good to get this done. So I think all of us could use those periodic check-ins, putting on our calendar. So thank you. I'm going to do that. It's not going to be consistent because I don't have a consistent bone in my body, but I will put it at different places in my calendar throughout the next few weeks and let you know how that goes.
I'll look forward to hearing about that.
Well, Katie, this has been such a treat, as I knew it would be. I hope that our listeners are inspired and reminded that they don't have to know what they want to do for the next 5 years, that learning what you're doing now, learning it really well so that you can apply all of your lessons to your next role, whatever that is, even if it's a completely different industry, a completely different job, taking all of what you're learning now in this moment about people, about yourself, and applying it in a practical way to whatever comes next.
That would be a great takeaway. And I know that, that type of thinking took me a while to get used to, but it has made a difference now that I'm there and helping to illustrate that for other people, that it doesn't have to be a linear path to what always comes next is quite important. So I appreciate the conversation, Sarah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, listeners, it's your turn. What did you hear in this conversation that struck you as something that resonated? Maybe it was about not knowing what you want to do next. Maybe it was, I do know what I want to do next, but I'm not being consistent enough to make it happen. I am so curious to hear your thoughts. Please share them either in the comments, wherever you see this shared, or send me an email. Visit elkinsconsulting.com. Check out the podcast page, and you'll see all the links related to KD and how you can follow what they're doing and maybe connect with them too. Thanks so much for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You. How you tell them will.
That's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.